So that's kind of the story you always hear about acquisitions. Mm-hmm. I don't want to acquire anybody because we'll lose the talent. Well, we haven't really lost the talent, and that's because we spent a lot of time thinking about how can we make people feel more fulfilled? How can we make them feel like what they're doing is more meaningful and that they're more productive? And a lot of that is you can find in that sweet spot bank size, right? So still small enough that if they want to call the CEO up and talk to him or email me or text me, they can, but big enough to be able to actually do 95, 97% of what a large commercial institution can do. And, and we're kind of at $5.8 billion. That's kind of where we are.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here today in the Propel Production Podcast Studio in Baton Rouge, and we welcome our guest, President and CEO of B1 Bank, Mr. Jude Melville. Jude, welcome to the podcast.
Morning. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and thank you for being our title sponsor this season as well as season 2. We do 40 episodes a season. We're halfway through our 3rd season. So
hardest working man in show business.
Yeah, look, this is our 100th episode. It's a milestone.
Is that right?
Yeah,
okay. Congrats.
Yeah, milestone event. So we wanted to get you on.
Yeah, and it's been fun to watch it progress over time.
Well, I appreciate it, and we greatly appreciate the support. I wanted to start by asking you to give us a thumbnail sketch of who B1 Bank is and where you are today.
Sure. Well, we're really true to how we started, being a business-oriented community bank. You know, we feel like there's a need there, something kind of in between smaller banks can offer and maybe what big banks are willing to offer, which is the technology and the balance sheet to enable growing companies to have access to the capital they need, but still have the relationship orientation that entrepreneurs and people that are creating something also need. So both kinds of support, capital, and knowing who it is that you're talking to, I guess would be the way to put it. And so we started with the idea that we would do that in Baton Rouge, but over time we've actually grown over multiple state regions. So we're in every major city in Louisiana and some not as major. We're the largest by deposits. We're the largest Louisiana headquartered bank now. And then we also, over the past few years, have made a push into Texas. So we're in Dallas and Houston, about a third of our assets. And so we're about $5.8 billion in total assets. We also have been working, especially lately, on kind of filling out our product set. So not just being a bank for the companies, but also being able to serve the leaders and the senior management and the owners of companies, which means not only in banking services, but also in wealth management and asset management. So we also have about a $7 billion an assets under management company headquartered in Jackson, actually, Mississippi, that serves individuals and companies as well, and not just other companies, but also other financial institutions. So we also have a still nascent business, I suppose you would say, in serving about 100 community banks around the Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi area.
Well, good. Let's dial into it. So when you took over as CEO in 2011, B1 Bank was about a $1 billion bank at that time?
Not quite. We were about $650 million.
650.
Yeah. Seems like a long time ago now.
Yeah. Well, it is, but a lot's happened, and I want to get into the story of how you and your team have grown that from 650 to 5.8 billion, along with all of the other things that have happened. But I wanted to kind of dial it back and talk about your beginning and growing up in North Louisiana. You're a Bossier City guy?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Bossier City. Proud North Louisiana guy. Still have my 318 area code on my cell phone.
Yeah.
I don't have my 318 tattoo, but I have the cell phone still. So
I read the book that your uncle, Governor Buddy Roemer, wrote about the farm that he grew up on, Scopena. That's the name of the book.
That's right.
I love that book. You also grew up there?
I did. Fourth generation growing up on Scopena. Obviously a generation after Buddy grew up, so a little different, but still an active farm when I was young, and cotton farm, soybeans, tomatoes, actually, when I was in high school. I had a cotton gin, so my grandmother would run the cotton gin for all the cotton farmers in the area. And then our Scopena was right next to the LSU Agricultural Center, right next door, so one grandfather was a farmer through Scopena. Charles, yeah, went by Budgie, or Grandpapa to me. My other grandfather was the senior agronomist at the LSU Experiment Station, and they were best friends.
So that would have been your father's father?
Would have been my father's father, yeah. So my father and mother grew up about a mile apart.
So your mother and Buddy were brother-sister?
That's right. Buddy was the oldest, and my mother was the youngest of five, is the youngest of five.
So that's interesting. So those were side by side. And so is that how your parents met?
Yeah, they went to elementary school together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Long time. Curtis Elementary, which is the same elementary that I went to.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of neat to have that connection.
One of the things I loved about your uncle's book, Scopena, was the talk of around the table, at dinner time, and how meals were shared and conversations were, everyone was engaged to take part in the conversations, and it just sounded, there was such a focus on education. Mm-hmm. And it seems that would have been your grandfather, Charles Roemer, at the farm on that side of the family, was engaged in making all those conversations happen. And
yeah, and I would give my grandmother equal credit.
Yeah.
I definitely, although I was certainly had the benefit of having a lot of great male role models. So growing up, my grandfathers, my uncles, Buddy, but I have other uncles as well, and my father, of course, and then growing up on a farm setting with multiple cousins, I had lots of older cousins as well, so lots of male role models. But my grandmother actually was also a very, very special person and very driven, and really kind of the glue that held the family together.
Yeah, I can remember now passages from the book where Buddy mentioned that as well.
But always a focus on learning, always a focus on curiosity, always a focus on being able to defend yourself intellectually in some way, I would say. It's just a lot of strong personalities that had a lot of opinions, and growing up around the table with that, I think might have been more important than some of the actual technical education that I got.
Yeah. The educational challenges beyond the farm and high school and history with Harvard University. I know some members of your family attend there. You did as well. What was it that drove that?
Growing up in a family of high achievers, that certainly kind of was planted early. That not necessarily going to Harvard, just being all I could be, and that was both on Buddy's side of the family, but also on the other side of my family. My dad is very much I remember in the 7th grade telling him I was going to run for treasurer, the student body, and he said, "Well, why not president?" So that's I've just always had very positive reinforcement from family members. So I grew up probably irrationally confident, I suppose. And, I also had something that a lot of people don't have, is just visibility into having seen somebody do it. I mean, I had a couple. Two of my uncles went to Harvard, and I had an older cousin as well, Chaz. I keep saying had, like they're all past tense. But so everything's a little more realistic when you've actually seen people do it.
Yeah.
So
if they can
great
do it,
great advantage for me. Yeah, and actually I was. Again, kind of irrationally confident, but I didn't apply to very many schools. I just kind of always knew that's where I was going.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that it worked out.
And then beyond that, your degree in college was what?
It was in social theory. I always sound a little silly. I feel like I sound silly when I say that. At Harvard, social studies was the technical name.
Right.
But it was really a degree in social theory, and it was a combination field: government, psychology, sociology, economics, and history.
That makes so much sense now. I don't know that I knew that beforehand. I want to talk at some point about the culture that you've built at B1 Bank, and then the challenges as you do acquisitions and bring other banks into the fold and integrating cultures from other banks. It makes sense why you have been so successful at that. Maybe that plays a role in it. But beyond...
I hadn't really thought about that connection, but I suppose being attuned to not only different cultures, but how we as individuals process information, how we make decisions. Those things all certainly fold into being CEO of a growing company.
And then you worked on a master's. Tell us about that.
I went to London School of Economics, was able to do a master's in management. I've been the benefit of a lot of generosity. So when I went to Harvard, I went on an Air Force scholarship. The military paid for me to go to Harvard. And then when I went to LSE, went on the Rotary Club Ambassadorial Fellowship, it was called. So they're just a lot of very generous entities and people in the world, and the Rotarians are one of those groups. And every year they pick 2 people per state. Well, at least there were 2 in Louisiana. Right. I'm not sure of other states, but to fund their graduate education.
Wow.
And the only thing that you have to do is you have to go somewhere overseas. So they're trying to create this cultural ambassadorial ship, which makes sense in the title. You have to go overseas, and you have to agree to go tell people about your experience. So it was nice to be able to have a reason to interact when I was in England with families and Rotarians, and then the chance to come back and kind of share the news here. So It was a great experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So the military experience started at what point in your life?
Freshman at Harvard. Yeah, so ROTC, and I was one of those. So much of my life, in retrospect, has been accidental, I suppose, or maybe God-driven is the way I would prefer to say it. Never had any intention to be in the military, wasn't of interest, really. I just happened to be awarded a scholarship and wasn't in a position to pay for Harvard without utilizing scholarships.
Right.
My father is a pastor. Not a lot of economic strength, I guess, at that time. And so I needed to try to find a way to do it. So the military was my way to do it. Was hesitant, reluctant, tried to find ways not to do it. When you're 17 and you're making a multiple year commitment after college without it being a passion, it seemed like a big deal. And I guess it was a big deal, but one of those things in life, like many things in my life, looking back, I would take my military experience over my Harvard experience. So the reason I did the military was to pay for Harvard, but it actually ended up being better for me and more meaningful to me. So Harvard was meaningful, but
sure.
But what's contributed more to who I am, I think, has been my military experience.
So talk about that. How did that military experience progress beyond college?
So owed them 4 years after college for the education, and ended up they allowed me to go do the LSE thing in between before I started. So Came in, and it's one of those kind of stereotypical military experiences, kind of hurry up and wait. So I got my orders after I was transitioning out of grad school, and had about 6 days to be in Southern Ohio. That's where they put me for my first assignment, and so I raced up there and got there and knocked on the door, and the unit that I had been assigned to didn't know that I had been assigned to them. I was kind of irritated about it. They didn't actually want me, so I went back to the HR and got a new assignment, and they didn't want me, so I went back and got a third assignment, and finally somebody took me. And so here I am, Harvard grad, London School of Economics, thinking I'm a hot shot, right? And the military was lucky to have me, and it turns out they didn't feel the same. So, but ended up with that experience in Ohio. I was there about 9 months and got fortunate. Did have some people looking out for me, and met a couple people, and ended up being asked to transfer to the Pentagon for a couple of years. So I moved to D.C. and I was there in D.C. for 2 years. At which point I was able to volunteer to go back overseas. So I was able to go to Turkey. So I was in Turkey for about 1.5 years. And in Turkey I did contracting. So I would find Turkish small businesses, contractors to do things for us, fix runways, build hangars, things of that nature. And I was getting out, so had a job actually lined up with Enron. I don't know if you knew that about me or not, but I was planning on going to Houston to be a part of that. That was kind of what my plan was. But again, God was watching out for me, I guess. Well, I probably shouldn't say that, because it was a bad reason for me not doing that, but ended up good for me, and that 9/11 happened. And since I was already transitioning out, my replacement was en route. Usually you wouldn't deploy from Turkey forward, they would backfill from Europe or from America. Because my replacement was going, I had the opportunity after 9/11 to go into first Oman, which is where our forces kind of gathered, parts of them, and then into Pakistan. And
so you were on your way out of service?
I was transitioning out, yeah.
And then 9/11 happened, and
I had the opportunity to stay. And so I ended up staying for a little over a year, and most of that in a deployed environment after 9/11, Operation Enduring Freedom, so which turned out to be one of the most rewarding parts of my life. So,
in what way?
And none of that would have happened if I hadn't just needed to pay for school,
Yeah. How was that? How did you find that so rewarding?
Well, there's something, it's kind of the best part of being an entrepreneur, in that you wake up every day believing that you're making a difference. The good thing about being in the military is you're not out having to raise money and not having to sell stuff necessarily. So you don't necessarily have some of the downside to being an entrepreneur, but obviously there are other downsides. You just wake up every day when you're in that environment feeling clean, like you're contributing, like you're making a difference. And that's really what most of us want out of work, is to feel like it means something. And
so you got a lot of gratification out of what you were doing in serving your country at that time?
I did. And then also just interaction with teammates. So I learned a lot about the military is a complicated organization with a lot of moving parts, and teams kind of coalesce and then change, and based on what the mission is. And so the idea of interacting with people for periods of time, maybe not years, maybe weeks, maybe days, making things happen, also very, very rewarding as well. Met a lot of really neat people.
That's fantastic. You extended it that 1 year. Did you leave the service at that point?
I did. So I came back and
this is a year after 9/11, so things were still, the world had changed, right?
Yeah, it did, in the sense that the world had changed. But one of the first feelings when I got back was the world had changed, but here I was back in America, and I didn't feel like America had necessarily changed. When you're deployed, you miss out on things. Maybe it's going out to eat. Maybe it's really being attuned to the NFL playoffs. Mm-hmm. There are just certain things that happen in everyday life that don't happen to you. And I just remember a week after I got back, being at the mall, and I was thrown off for a second just by the realization that, hey, everybody's still doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I'd been gone for 3 years because I'd been in Turkey and
right.
and then deployed beyond that. So it's a little, as a veteran coming back home, it's a little bit disconcerting to realize that while you were off doing something, and for me it wasn't sacrifice, it was all gain, it was all to the good for me. But when you are feeling like you are doing something that's important and necessary, and then you come home and you realize that life goes on, that can be a pretty disconcerting feeling, and one that takes a little bit of adjusting to. And you may not know this about me either. So came back. Louisiana's not the easiest place to find work in, right? Meaningful work. And so I ended up doing some kind of temporary things, and one of which was running a U.S. Senate race. I managed it for Susie Terrell, who was running for Senate against Mary Landrieu. And so did that, which is kind of an intense kind of literally a campaign, right? But in the sense military-like in the campaign. And I realized at the end, and while I was doing that, we declared war in Iraq. And I realized at the time that I missed camaraderie. I missed the feeling of cleanness. I missed the feeling of accomplishment. And so ended up partnering with a little company here, Arkell International, George Nost. I'm sure you know George.
Yeah.
I actually went back to Iraq. Or went back to the Middle East. It was my first time in Iraq. Back to the Middle East to represent them serving the military. So doing some of the things that I did when I was in the military, helping, I think, through supply lines or providing construction services, things of that nature. So I actually went back and spent almost a year back in Iraq at that point before I finally made my permanent transition back home.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, you just never know where life's going to lead you.
Hannes T. Bourgeois provides accounting services, litigation support, as well as tax and assurance services to companies and individuals throughout the region. With offices in Baton Rouge, Denham Springs, New Orleans, and Hammond, their team of professionals have a wide range of specialized expertise and give personalized attention to each client they work with. HTB serves all types of business structures, including corporations, private businesses, startups, individuals, and more. So call them today to learn how they can help you. Reach out to them by phone or learn more at their website, www.htbcpa.com. A little testimonial here. HCB has been my accounting firm for over 30 years and have guided my initial company from startup to expanding to numerous operating companies. HCB has provided guidance in helping us expand across the U.S., doing business in more than 30 states. Flat out, HCB has made all the difference in the world to our business. This podcast is sponsored by NAI Ladder & Bloom, Louisiana's leading commercial real estate firm, offering expertise in every discipline, including office, industrial, retail, multifamily, and corporate services. Their agents guide you through the real estate process from start to finish, using a host of marketing, prospecting, and analytical technologies. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the most trusted name in commercial real estate, NAI Ladder & Bloom. Learn how they can work for you at www.ladderbloom.com. Turnkey Solutions is a nationwide cybersecurity and IT systems expert, providing the services that growing businesses need to stay ahead of hackers, hurricanes, and IT nightmares. With 24/7 support teams and offices across Louisiana and Texas, they bring peace of mind to companies of all sizes. Their 5-star rated team provides lightning-fast IT support with the cybersecurity and business continuity solutions today's businesses demand. When you're looking for a technology partner to provide you with peace of mind, find out more by calling them at 225-224-6594 or chat with them online at www.tks.la/NXT.
You're back in the U.S. You're back in Louisiana, in North Louisiana, right?
No, actually, I was overseas, and my uncle, Buddy, I think, was worried about me. And I was feeling like this was going to be a long slog to make a difference in Baghdad. And so I was also getting a little bit older. I was 26, 27, or 28, 29, somewhere in there.
Right.
I felt like I was ready to kind of start the next phase for real this time. So Buddy was running a business-oriented bank here in Baton Rouge called the Business Bank.
Right.
I asked if I would come help him expand that bank around the state. Essentially be his gopher while we did that. I thought it'd be a good kind of 6-month project to kind of help me transition back and figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And a couple months into it, though, one of the main shareholders in the bank, probably a mentor of yours at some point, Mr. Milton Womack, passed away. And so that started kind of a chain of events where that bank ended up selling pretty quickly to Bancorp South, what they were called at the time. And Buddy and I talked about starting again, but this time with a little broader mandate to be statewide. And so again, I was kind of help him for 6 months. And once we kind of got it took a little longer. We had the hurricane, and Buddy had some hard, a quadruple bypass, while we were in formation. And so it took almost a couple years to get the bank up and running, but we finally did in February of 2006. And after we opened in Baton Rouge, then I moved home to Shreveport, Bossier to start our location up there. So that's kind of how we got started. And I was, again, thinking I would do it for 6 months. Then I'd gotten married while we were starting the bank to Amy, and we had our first kid in November of that year. So the bank and my family are kind of intertwined from the beginning. And so first kid, second kid, Caroline, then Emma, and at that point kind of need a job for real, right? Need to have a mortgage, and ended up staying with the bank.
So early on, anticipated. Early on, the bank growth, you mentioned Baton Rouge and then Bossier and Shreveport, and then the expansion was opening business centers in markets around the state, right?
Mm-hmm. And the idea was that we really just probably needed one location per market.
Right.
We'd use technology and great service, going out to the clients' offices as opposed to always expecting them to come to us.
Right.
Kind of the
so a branch light
branch light,
type model. It was a great growth trajectory for a de novo bank starting in 2006, and the bank just continued to grow in market and in markets across the state and was doing well. At some point, Buddy, as CEO, determined that he had a higher calling. Mm-hmm. Right? Tell us about that.
Well, Buddy, obviously, the political background was a key part of his life and key part of the contribution he's made to the lives of others. Did have a dream of running for president at some point. And so in 2010, 2011, he decided that he would give that a shot. And we had most people think a bank just kind of springs forth fully formed, right? They've all been around for 100 years and heavily bureaucratized and permanent. But banks, like other companies, are entrepreneurial endeavors. And so we had a good 4 or 5 years of startup mode, which is intense and does require certain focus and dedication that all entrepreneurs have to decide that they're willing to invest. Our bank was started really with Buddy's energy, right? So he had given a lot for that concentrated period of the startup phase, and so it kind of made sense for him to focus those energies on something he was equally passionate about. And we were kind of in a mode where we needed to, as with any startup, you kind of have this fast growth, and then you really need to kind of catch up with yourself. And personality-wise, maybe at the time that was probably a better role for me in some ways than Buddy. And so we made that transition. We stayed, obviously very close and partners in a number of things.
And so that was in 2011. Of course, 2008 and 10 were difficult years for the world with the Great Recession. Managed to navigate our way through that at the bank.
So we were kind of at the in banking, a lot of things happen kind of lagging, right? So 2010, 11 really was kind of taken up by not only the just general catching up with your startup phase, but also we had the remnants of the Great Recession, which not only means whatever asset quality challenges you might experience because of the recession, but also the regulatory reaction. So a lot of time those next couple years really dealing with our regulatory relationship as we transitioned into, hey, this is not just a startup that's going to sell, but this is something that's going to be around for a while. That requires some choices and some changes and some processes and procedures and personnel changes as well.
Yeah. I was always fascinated with the constant org chart manipulation or...
not manipulation. Tinkering. How about that?
Yeah. That's a much better word. And it was a constant process as you were growing the bank. So you get in 2011, you get through the, what you just talked about, the Great Recession impact, and then now you're ready to grow the bank. So in 2014, you consummate the first acquisition that B1 Bank made, which was the start of several others that happened in the years that followed, completing the fifth acquisition earlier this year. So I was curious, when you look across that experience from 11 to 22, or even if you look at from 14 when you did that first acquisition to 22, what is the difference between that first experience with you and that first acquisition to this last one?
Well, it's like anything in life. Hopefully, anyway, when you do things multiple times, you get better at them. And certainly, we're more, we've done it now, so we feel confident. We at least know what questions to ask, what direction to move in. Well, first, let me say that it's important to me to talk about a couple of things. One is that although we have done a number of acquisitions and they've been very important, and each one has its own kind of unique addition to make, or has made to our whole. We're not a roll-up in the sense that we want to just grow through acquisitions.
Right.
A majority of our assets have been organically grown. And
one of the great successes of B1 Bank is organic growth. I
think so, and so I'm really proud of that because although it's not easy to do acquisitions, it's not quite the same in terms of accomplishment to actually building it organically. And so I've been very proud of the fact that we've been able to do both and have them support each other in a sense. And one of the things that I've learned over that time is that the things that make you a good organic growth story or company are really the same things that make you a good acquirer. If you think about making decisions about capital or decisions about product set, and most importantly, decisions about people. We decided very early on that we would try to take the best from each bank. So there are two ways to do an acquisition. One is to buy the assets and strip out the people, anything that made it unique, and say, hey, you're going to do things the B1 way now. Right. The other way is to say, hey, there's a lot of things that we do really well, but there's some things that you do better than us. And we'd like to learn from that, and we'd like to actually make that a part of the B1 way.
Right.
And so I'm really proud of our open-mindedness towards making the most of the acquisitions that we've, and not just the balance sheet, but the people and the particular skill sets. So for all of our acquisitions, we've actually grown that area post-acquisition, which is not always the case. And really proud of the fact that we have 4 former CEOs still on staff. I think it speaks heavily to the openness that we have in an organization to enabling people that might not even think that they're interested to actually have a better experience and more meaningful experience than they anticipated.
And it also kind of points to the fact that those CEOs saw in B1 Bank an opportunity to grow their bank even more by the merge or the acquisition, and we're staying on for the ride.
Yeah, I think so. And not just their bank, but their people, more opportunities for their people to perform in jobs they didn't know they'd have the chance to perform in and take on new endeavors. One of the keys to our acquisitions, I believe, has been the philosophy of treating acquired employees as equal to our long-term employees.
Right.
So it's important to me that day one, and even the way that we've done it, even before you have a period of about 6 months between coming to a deal and actually the deal coming to fruition. And so we've put a lot of energy and investment into making sure that the employees of the bank that's going to be a part of us feel like they're already a part of us.
Right.
And are treated with as much care and respect and thoughtfulness as our long-term employees are. And I think that's gone a long way. And that's the CEOs feel that, and hopefully the individuals that have joined us feel that sooner rather than later as well.
You know, early on, one thing that I noticed that you did well is you hired personnel that were, punching above their weight. Like maybe they had more horsepower than what you needed at that moment for that position. By having that skill set available, it was able to help you leverage into the growth. And so you weren't really outgrowing employees as you grew the business. And then, as you mentioned, just adding more talent through the acquisitions. The other thing...
I am a big believer in hiring ahead or hiring for the bank you want to be. I remember when I became a captain in the Air Force, I told somebody that day that I don't really feel any different, but all of a sudden people are treating me different. And they said, yeah, it's just sometimes you have to pretend before you can be, right? And so I've always been in fact, sometimes it can even be a flaw in that I don't always sound like I celebrate or appreciate today, because I'm often thinking about, no matter how well we do, I'm thinking about what we can be tomorrow.
Right.
But I did learn over time that if you want to be something, you need to, I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but you do have to kind of begin pretending, and then one day you wake up and it actually becomes reality. Our first acquisition was traumatic. It was. I'm certainly glad that we did it. It kind of put us on this trajectory, but it was tough. We weren't prepared necessarily to absorb a bank that was 2/3 our size. That bank had some difficulties. They were coming out of the Great Recession as well.
Right.
And it was just the first time to do something, which is always harder, but ended up, again, back to the military. I had a colonel tell me once that it doesn't matter how fine the metal is until it's been through the fire. And so that acquisition was kind of our first chance to kind of go through the fire. Ended up changing out essentially all of my management team after that acquisition because of the difficulty of the process. And so one of the things I learned there was as you referenced, the need to hire up. So that was when we first went and got Keith to come join our team, which was a big deal for a small community bank to go hire a chief technology officer from a much larger bank to come be our COO. And that kind of taught me that side of it, that I needed to invest in people in terms of trying to bring in outsiders that can help us. But also had the chance as part of that switch in the management team to promote some other insiders who have continued to be a part of our leadership team, and Greg and Phil and Heather and others that came from within. And so one thing that was kind of stuck with me through that period was that, when you first become CEO, you don't want to make too many changes, or particularly when you come from the exec team to become CEO.
Right.
You kind of feel like, well, these people can do what I need them to do, and they're experienced and talented, and that's the most important thing. And what I realized over time was that the team is the most important thing, and how that team chemistry is. And that's okay. It's okay to put a priority on enjoying working together.
Right.
Because that's how you're going to get the best output ultimately over time. And so not only did I learn during that first acquisition to hire up in terms of bringing people in, but But also, I learned about making sure that the people I was working with were people that I wanted to work with on a daily basis. And that provided some opportunities for some people to grow beyond where they thought they might grow. So actually, we've helped them and each other become more than we probably thought we could be.
Yeah, that's
a neat thing.
That sense of team is palpable for sure. And to watch how some of these individuals you've mentioned have grown over the years is really amazing.
I'm really proud of them.
Yeah, there's some exceptional stories buried in there. One thing that
But I will say one thing I'm also proud of is that as they've grown and as they've achieved new levels, part of the reason we've been able to bring in other people is that they've been open to that and acceptive of that. And it'd be easy for me to say, hey, we're going to hire this person, right? But that doesn't really matter if they aren't accepted. They're rejected, by them as
exactly,
something being an organ being rejected by the body, right? And so we've always been very good at recognizing the benefit of being associated with other people. And I'm proud of us for that.
Yeah. Another personnel type story that I really like to see is in the personnel that come with an acquisition. You've acquired another bank. And each bank has its limits of what they can do based on their capital and how much business they can do. And they invariably have relationships along the way that may grow and may outgrow the bank, right? But I love the stories of once B1 has made an acquisition and then can bring that balance sheet to that relationship, to that banker, so they can leverage up and they can start to grow some of those relationships that maybe they previously couldn't have serviced. I love those stories because it just shows the value of that acquisition and that unlocked potential to grow that business.
Well, that's been another key to our success from an acquisition standpoint, not just of banks, but just of people in general. I view my job as to create a platform from which others can responsibly maximize who they are, right? The producers can produce in the way that's the most meaningful and most beneficial. And so we've worked hard to be a platform that not only a balance sheet, but also decision-making process, communication, educational tools, ways to help people maximize who they are. And so when a new bank comes into our system, it's fun to watch people discover all of a sudden that they can actually better serve their clients, being part of a greater whole. And you alluded to the balance sheet impact, but also the product set and also just the multiple perspectives that we might bring. When you get larger, if you can corral the perspectives, then there's a benefit to having those perspectives that you might not get if you're just a single small institution.
Absolutely.
So it's been, we've been very fortunate in that we've lost very few producers through the years. That's kind of the story you always hear about acquisitions. I don't want to acquire anybody because we'll lose the talent. Well, we haven't really lost the talent, and that's because we spent a lot of time thinking about how can we make people feel more fulfilled? How can we make them feel like what they're doing is more meaningful and that they're more productive? And a lot of that is you can find in that sweet spot bank size, right? So still small enough that if they want to call the CEO up and talk to them, or email me or text me, they can, but big enough to be able to actually do 95, 97% of what a large commercial institution can do. And we're kind of at $5.8 billion. That's kind of where we are.
Pivotal is pleased to sponsor the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Pivotal is a commercial building contractor that performs new building construction, building maintenance, tenant improvements, renovations, and additions. Pivotal has been in business for over 25 years. The Pivotal team is simply the best. They have an impeccable safety record and they crush schedules. A focus on quality and professional communication is at the root of their success. Pivotal also performs programs for clients who build in multiple markets with current projects in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. If you are looking for the perfect addition to your project team, a contractor who can deliver the results you need to succeed, Pivotal is the one. When it's critical, call Pivotal. They can be found online at pivotalperforms.com. This podcast is sponsored by Mayhall, Fondren Blaze, a Louisiana business litigation firm. offering sophisticated legal advice that is tailored to meet the needs of their individual clients, including a wide variety of litigation, complex business negotiations, corporate formations, closings, and title examination. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the expertise of MFB, a Louisiana practice made for business. Learn how we can work with you at www.mfbfirm.com. Could you or your business benefit from a comprehensive financial plan? Our sponsor, Centura Advisors, is a locally owned firm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana that specializes in personal and business financial planning, tax planning, corporate retirement plans, and investment management. We provide an all-in-one wealth management service so busy business owners like you can take back your valuable time. Visit www.centura-advisors.com to learn more. Centura Advisors, it's time to plan your future.
2018, the bank took a big step and went public, right? It's a long process. Tell us, help us understand from the perspective of a CEO how your life changes from being a publicly traded company versus private.
Unexpectedly, it certainly has been a more significant transition than I realized. And the challenge with being a fairly small institution in the grand scheme is that it's not like you all of a sudden aren't doing your day job, right? So as the management team of a public company, the managing the public part is extra in a sense, right? You can't just not do the other stuff. And so it's been challenging both in terms of additional workload, additional travel responsibilities, steep learning curve. So harder than I realized. And then expense-wise, it's quite expensive to be public. So it's not something, I guess the point I'm making, it's not something to be entered into lightly.
Right.
It has been a big deal, but it's also been a great opportunity. We wouldn't be who we were. We wouldn't have the track record that we have. We wouldn't be recruiting the same people that we were recruiting if we hadn't gone through that process. And a lot of great things have come out of being public too, which is one of which, of course, the most important thing is the access to capital, right? So being able to continue to fund your growth, having a currency to use for M&A, so we don't have to give potential targets or partners a promise. We can give them an actual currency that they can
stock.
They can stock, that they can liquefy if they want, or they can commit to being a part of the long run and recognize value over the long run. But maybe most importantly, it's given us a certain measure of discipline. When you're public, you have to explain what you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to answer questions about it. And it's not a matter of just, hey, the CEO has this great idea, let's go do it. It's also, here's why it's a good idea, or here's an idea somebody else had and why we should adopt it because it makes the most sense given our context, part of which is being public. It has led us to have a little higher degree of financial knowledge about our own operations and decision-making, which I think we're better off for having. So from a corporate perspective, it's made us better. And then for me personally, the as you've known over the years, being public is not necessarily my greatest desire, right? I tend to be something of an introvert, and I'm certainly more private than I am public. And I'm sure growing up in the business with Buddy probably made me even more that way a little bit because he was so charismatic, right? So I tend to be a little more reticent, a little more comfortable, not necessarily needing the spotlight. But when you're public, you got to be public, right? So it's caused me to grow in the sense that I've had to actually be the face of the bank and to be out front and found that I've actually enjoyed that. And it doesn't, it's not totally not in line with who I was when I was younger, being president of this or that. In my adultness, the idea of serving as a public company leader, I think, has made me a better leader all around. By the way, I should take a moment as a member of our board to thank you for the support that y'all have shown me over the years. When you 36 become a CEO, not completely confident the whole board felt I should be CEO at the time, and we did have some challenges we needed to work through, and being able to go from that, spending 3 or 4 years getting our deck in order, and then embarking upon the growth journey that we've had the past 5 years, which began with going public or simultaneous with our first acquisitions. It's been an amazing journey, and not only our senior management, but our board has played a significant role in that.
So you have the challenges of, adjusting to life as a CEO of a publicly traded company. as well as all of the economic challenges that all of us in business faced going back to even before you were CEO, the aftermath of Katrina and then the Great Recession we talked about, and then, energy market crashes.
The energy crash of 16, 17.
Right, and then COVID. And then, particularly in Louisiana, a battery of hurricanes,
right,
which have dramatic impact on the operations and working through all that. So it seems to be this constant barrage of one thing after another that, as I mentioned, all businesses face. But, as a CEO, how have you managed to make your way through all that? Because it's been a lot.
It has been a lot, much more than I would have anticipated. But, one thing when I was talking earlier about not recognizing beforehand that the military would actually be a better contributor to me and who I am than the Harvard experience, not realizing that I even wanted to be a banker. I just thought it was a short-term project. As I've gotten older, I've certainly come to realize that I'm not very good at predicting the future. And most of us aren't, right? We all like to do it, but most of us aren't. So most of our banking experience, especially the past 5-6 years, has been unpredicted, been a little bit of a surprise, which I think leads to a healthy sense of humbleness. Not being able to predict means you can't always control, which means that there's no reason to be arrogant or egocentric when it comes to how we lay out a vision. It also makes you realize that the only thing that really helps you get through crises is the people that are on your team. So it reinforces that idea of the need to grow people and the need to bring on new people. And one of the advantages of getting a little bigger is that you can hire without betting the farm always, So, for instance, this year we hired a director of business continuity for the first time. So when we've had hurricanes in the past, we've always just pitched in and dealt with it. We still will do that, but we also have somebody organizing it now and preparing and thinking ahead. So you can add some talent that you couldn't afford when you were younger, which is nice. One thing having these, in the military they don't call them challenges, they call them opportunities to excel. And so these opportunities that we've had over the years also has kind of guided the investments that we've made in terms of the bank's growth. So it's easy just to talk about the numbers when it comes to a bank in particular, just how many assets you have, right? Which is kind of how we started off, because that's the natural kind of thing to do in banking. But one thing I've learned over the years is that it's really the composition of the growth is more important than the growth. What the balance sheet is made up of is more important than the size of the balance sheet. So one thing that we've done, this imperative to grow, has not been about achieving a higher number of assets. It's been about diversifying risk. Right. So a bank, unlike a hedge fund or like a lot of companies, in a hedge fund you can have a lot of little losses because you feel confident that you're going to have a big hit that's going to not be capped, hopefully, and will make all the little losses worth it. Right. There are no big hits in banking. So we have to be careful not to let the little losses overwhelm us. And so the reason for me to get bigger has been to make sure that we're diversifying our risks so that one bad thing happening doesn't jeopardize our future. And so part of that is types of companies we serve, making sure that we're doing C&I companies and not just CRE companies. Although we like real estate too, obviously, but want to have a good mix. But not overly relying upon energy companies, for example, because there's downside to that, even though there's also upside. But this push to diversify geographically has been a pretty major theme as we've grown, and that's why we've gone into Dallas and to Houston, and why North Louisiana has been so important to us as well. Is that one of the ways that you protect yourself from uncertainty is to make sure that you're diversified geographically. Right. We bought Smith Shellnut Wilson, which was an asset manager that I mentioned earlier, partly for the idea that we wanted to do more, but partly because it's a risk diversifier. One of the things that is tough for smaller banks is that 90% of their income comes from taking credit risk. Right. And the big banks, that's less than half of their income. Maybe a third of their income sometimes comes from taking credit risk. So kind of the holy grail for a small bank is to figure out how can we provide services that we can get paid for that don't involve taking credit risk. And so wealth management was one of those ways that we can increase our non-interest income, which ultimately is all about diversifying our revenue stream, which ultimately makes us stronger. So long winding way of saying one way that you deal with surprises every year, it seems, is to try to create a balance sheet and an organization and an org chart that's diversified enough and redundant enough that you can weather the short-term storm, which should ultimately make you stronger in the long run. There's a great book, well, I think it's a great book, called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, I believe his name is. And it talks about, it's one thing to be, there are different kinds of organizations and societies and people, and some are fragile, right? So something bad happens and they fall apart.
Right.
Some are robust, meaning when something bad happens, they continue to survive. And some are what he calls anti-fragile, which means when something bad happens, we actually get stronger. We actually get better. And that's really what I believe has happened to B1 over the years, is that when we've had these economic surprises or natural disasters or whatever the challenges might be, we've actually not only survived them, but we've actually used them to become better, use them to become stronger. If we can keep doing that, pretty excited to see where we will lead in a way that I can't predict years from now.
That's brilliant. Management of the balance sheet is what helps all this growth come to fruition. And there's so many events that have happened over the last 5 or 6 years in between capital raises through stock sales and subordinated debt issuances, and all of those are major projects unto themselves. Right, it involved a huge team effort and selling the company, and the story just seems to keep getting better and better as you look at those decks. But what's been really interesting is not just a strategy that you and your team deploy and when those things need to happen, because you would have different options or alternatives depending on what else is going on in the broader market. Right. So not only that, but also to see how your team has been able to grow to do some of these initiatives internally, self-managed. Talk about how you got your team to that point.
Specifically, you're referring to the fact that we've actually raised forms of capital and debt without utilizing an investment banker.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we do have, I want to say, we have done a lot with investment bankers and have some great relationships.
You'll always have that.
Right. But reaching a point at which we can do it on our own saves money, for one thing, and gives us more optionality on when we do things and why we do things. And it also, it's quite rewarding. It's something to be proud of, right? And so teams perform best when they're proud of what they do. And so the opportunity to do something a little different, which this is different. We raised $72 million in preferred equity earlier this year, raised the money ourselves, and then we've also done over $50 million in subordinated debt. And that's not a typical path. So it gives us something. I've been a big believer in, I don't want to say staying busy, but life would be pretty boring. Companies would be pretty boring. Lives would be pretty non-meaningful if you weren't achieving things. And so there's some things that we do that they're important, but it's partly the process of going through achieving as a team maybe as important as the actual dollars that we raise or and I'm also a big believer in optionality. So there is no one right path. We need to be as flexible as we can. And if we can achieve on whichever path we choose, that'll work out well. But I will tell you about the capital raise. It's also an interesting lesson in the accumulation of good people. It wasn't my intent to design a team to go be able to raise our own capital. That was a byproduct of me. Well, what I did intend to do was accumulate good people that could do things. Right. I like to say that we like to hire athletes as opposed to forwards or centers or I'm thinking basketball right now because I watched a basketball game last night. But we want somebody that can play multiple roles. Right. You remember when Magic Johnson played center during the finals back in the 80s and when Kareem got hurt. But somebody that can be a point guard and a center is a true athlete. And so we try to hire athletes, and if you have the right number and the right chemistry in the room, unexpected things can happen. And at some point, somebody on the team just said, when we were talking about the need to do another capital raise, somebody said, why don't we just do it ourselves? Wasn't my idea. I am good at saying yes to ideas of others. So we went off and did it, and then we're able to do it again. And hopefully one day might be able to actually do it for other institutions. Line of business and activity that was not planned. It was the outcome of having the right people in the room.
When you look at the employees in your team as they're doing these things that maybe you didn't start out intending to do, and they have these wins by doing these projects, you can sense that team just getting stronger and stronger, more confident. And I love that. Look, there's so many things that we could talk about. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about so many incredible things that you've done, so many things that you've been involved in through the industry, in serving on Federal Reserve committees, and just fascinating things that you've done. But we don't have time for all of that, but I did want to spend a minute talking about the B1 Foundation and what the bank does through that foundation to benefit the community, because it's been very successful.
Sure. No, and just getting started, the wonderful thing about the industry that I'm in is that as a community banker, you get to do well by doing good, right? So our whole mission is to make a difference in the communities, and to be able to be paid to do that is kind of a dream come true. And one of the things that drove Buddy was the ability to contribute in elected office, and I often think how fortunate I am to be able to contribute and not have to get elected to do it, but just have it be part of the job that I happen to have. And part of that is, how do you do that the most efficiently and most effectively? And the origin of the foundation was post the 2016 floods. I was a little frustrated that the money that we raised from each other and from our employees and some clients to help our employees that were caught in the flood, in order to be able to continue to utilize that money and hopefully add to it to get ready for next time, we had to pay some pretty big fees for somebody to manage the money. And I felt like we could just do that ourselves. We're a bank.
Right.
And so we started a not-for-profit that could actually take contributions and then be able to manage those to set up an employee disaster relief fund. And once we got into that successfully, then we began to think about other ways that the foundation could help. And so you've got the disaster relief funding. You've got financial literacy, which is a big part of community banking. How do we help educate folks that have the drive and the technical know-how, but maybe not the financial acumen to go do things? And then the thing that we've started in the past 18 months that I'm especially excited about is an incubator for small businesses. So,
right.
And that's not so much kind of the stereotypical venture capital backed firms. It's more the local mechanic that wants to start his own body shop, or a number of kind of small, local, everyday type businesses, which are the majority of the businesses that are founded in America. But a lot of them are founded by one individual, and it's really kind of one job at a time, and they don't either have the time or the experience to really figure out the way to be banked. And so part of the mission of our foundation is how do we help guide these entrepreneurial endeavors into entities that can take advantage of the banking system in America. We've have a young man, Will Campbell, that runs that, working with Buddy Roemer, and we've had over 200 small businesses over the past 15 months or so that we've been able to help give financial advice to, many of whom have gone from not thinking they could actually be banked to actually being clients, either at our bank or somebody else's bank. Doesn't have to be us, but really proud of that transition that we're enabling. And so, those three categories are what the foundation's about. We're turning one of our former branches into an actual physical incubator,
right,
on Florida Avenue, and I hope to be able to do similar things in all of our other markets that we operate in over time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And to talk to Will he's just got so much energy and excitement, and he's very good at what he does.
He's terrific.
Wrapping up here, let's talk about your vision for the bank as you look out 5 or 10 years.
So one thing I won't say is an asset size, right?
Right.
So as we've discovered, it's not really about the asset size; it's about the impact that you make, and so I think we have an opportunity to go deeper in terms of the relationship that we have with our client base. Even if we don't grow to any more geographies, we're still playing in a fairly limited sphere of influence when it comes to the traditional community bank approach to loans and deposits. So the more products that we can bring to help clients do more, the better. And that may eventually include other forms of capital, and certainly want to build our advisory services through wealth management to help people through their entrepreneurial life cycle. So not just once I'm already established and I can qualify for debt, But before that, and that's kind of the incubator, is that before you can actually qualify for debt, maybe we can help you in that pre-stage. And then as you're growing your business, hopefully we'll be large enough, sophisticated enough to be able to help you grow. And then after you sell or exit, what do you do with the assets before you either start a new company or retire?
Right.
Hopefully we can help entrepreneurs through that phase of their journey as well. So not so concerned about geography, although I would be surprised if over the next 5-10 years we don't end up in a broader geography than we are in today. But
Sure.
Really concerned about depth of impact and making sure that we're really fulfilling the mandate of the community bank, which is to impact the communities. I think we have a chance. So you're as familiar as I am with the diminution of the number of banks over the past decades.
Right.
And so community banking industry in general is under threat. A lot of competitors, more competitors than we used to have, and a more active regulatory interface. And so there will probably be fewer community banks than 10 years than there are today. So some of those banks are going to have to define the future of community banking and what role. Community banks aren't going away, but their roles might change. The way they interact with technology might change. How they contribute to the communities might change. And so if you were to ask me 10 years from now what I was proud of, I think being a leading voice as a bank, as an institution, and figuring that out. Where does community banking go from here? And being that model is something that I would think we not only would be proud to do, but have a good chance to do.
Jude, I appreciate you so much coming in.
Yep,
we appreciate you supporting the podcast, B1 Bank. Continued success in everything that you do. It's been a great journey for B1 Bank, and I know it's still day one over there.
Yeah, we're still hungry.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I appreciate you having us, and I've enjoyed watching the guests that you've had over time, and having lunch today with one of them.
Wonderful.
And it's been neat to watch that development, and also neat to watch your development as a board member over those same time period that I've been developing. So
thank you,
thanks
sir.
for the friendship.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. It was a great honor to have Jude Melville on the podcast as our 100th guest. I am convinced that Jude is one of the finest bank CEOs in all of America. I've been to conferences for many years and listened to dozens and dozens of CEOs of much larger banks speak and present, and Jude Melville can hold the line with any one of those. He is an extremely strong CEO. He's highly intelligent. He's compassionate. There's an absence of ego there. And he builds a culture of respect. He respects his executives and every employee and every bank customer. We really appreciate Jude coming and sharing some of his wisdom. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.